The Pokemon games have so much hidden content in them, from mechanics and Pokemon species that are virtually inaccessible without a guide, to legendary Pokemon that have the most cryptic and complicated requirements to encounter, to side quests that require pixel hunting to complete. There are a surprising number of things that aren't made very clear to the player. I'm talking about things that are documented online, but are either barely explained by NPCs or just flat out not talked about in-game. Stuff that most players probably won't be able to access by themselves without the internet. Today, we're going to take a look at just a handful of pieces of hidden Pokemon content you need a guide for. One of the more obscure and strange things Game Freak added in Pokemon Emerald was Walled-Up Pepper. In this building north of the Pokemon Center in Rustboro City, on the second floor, you'll find Walled-Up Pepper in her bed with her dad and a bunch of Pokemon plushes surrounding her. Talk to the father and he'll say that he's trying to get Walda to laugh, but isn't having much luck. So, Walda's dad asks you for something funny to say to his daughter, and good luck with that, because this child doesn't seem to laugh at anything. So what's the deal with her? How do we make her laugh? The intent behind this whole thing is that there would be distribution events where players could obtain a code. And these are codes you're not gonna guess on your own. These things are more like passwords. Regardless, this code, when told to Walda's father, will cause Walda to laugh, and you'll be rewarded with a new wallpaper for your PC. However, the only known official distribution of a code for Walda was on a Japanese website back when Emerald released over there, in September of 2004. You gave the site your trainer ID number, and you got a code that, when given to Walda's father, would give you this wallpaper for your PC, a Pikachu pattern with a heart icon. While that was the only wallpaper ever officially released, there are tons of other additional possible wallpapers. What you're seeing on screen right now are just a few of the possible options. You can mix and match different patterns and icons to make your own special wallpaper using this page on pokewiki.de, which I'll be sure to link in the description. Pokewiki.de also has other code generators that are worth mentioning. There are generators to change the in-game time in Gold, Silver, and Crystal, and you can also unlock box wallpapers in Diamond, Pearl, Platinum, and HeartGold and SoulSilver. Also in HeartGold and SoulSilver, you can get codes for 3 eggs that'll hatch into Mareep, Wooper, and Slugma. The code generator also contains instructions on how to use the codes you're given, so definitely check it out if you want to mix up your next playthrough of these older Pokemon games. Before moving on, I'd like to talk about this video's sponsor, BetterHelp. Mental health can be one of those topics that's difficult to talk about, even if you grow up in a loving and supportive household like I did. As someone who was born male, there's also the stereotype that expressing your emotions as a man was a sign of weakness, and something that you could be made fun of for. It's something that can even be reinforced by your parents. My mom was always the one running over to me whenever I got hurt, getting emotional, asking if I was okay. Meanwhile, my dad would appear much more calm during these situations and less emotional. So, when I felt like I needed therapy, there were definitely some nerves on my end talking to my parents about what I was feeling and asking for help. In honor of Mental Health Awareness Month, I'm working with BetterHelp to stop the stigma around mental health and encourage more people to get support from a licensed therapist. If you think you need to speak to a licensed therapist, click the link in the description or go to betterhelp.com/Yuki. You'll get 10% off your first month and get matched with a therapist in as little as a couple of days. Now let's get back to the video. Let's stick around in HeartGold and SoulSilver for a moment, because I want to talk about a group of 5 Pokemon that are so well hidden that I wonder how many people found them without any sort of outside help. In HeartGold and SoulSilver, you can use Headbutt on trees to potentially find wild Pokemon. Each area also has certain trees that pull from a second group of possible encounters. This second group has differently leveled Pokemon, and even a different species or two, like Heracross. This stuff was in the original Gold and Silver, so okay, no problem. However, once you get to the post-game, there are 5 areas that have a third group of Pokemon. This third group is only found on 1 or 2 specific trees in each respective area, with zero indication or hint as to what tree this is. What are these 5 Pokemon in this third group? I wish I was kidding. These 5 Pokemon are Starly, Slakoth, Taillow, Burmy, and Cherubi. Furthermore, Taillow, Burmy, and Cherubi require rock climb to access the trees they're in, which you don't get until you get all 16 badges. And just to make things a little more aggravating, all 5 of these Pokemon only have a 35% encounter rate on their respective trees. In other words, if you had no idea these Pokemon were in these trees, then it's very possible you'd miss some or all of them if you don't use Headbutt multiple times, even if you're on the correct tree. I don't think there are any NPCs that hint about these trees, or the existence of this third group of 5 Pokemon, or anything like that. You just have to get lucky and find not only the tree, but then find the Pokemon. You know, this reminds me of how Munchlax and Feebas were handled in the early days. I'm sure most people are probably familiar with how they work, but just to be thorough, let me take a moment to go over the both of them, starting with Feebas. In Ruby, Sapphire, and Emerald, Feebas is found on Route 119 via fishing, but there's a catch. I've seen multiple numbers for this, but by my count, there are 447 fishable tiles on Route 119. Out of those 447 tiles, Feebas can only appear on 6 of them. Which 6? Good question, because unlike the previous Pokemon we talked about, the 6 tiles that house Feebas are completely random. The 6 tiles get changed every time the Dewfer trendy phrase gets changed, although having a specific trendy phrase doesn't result in specific Feebas tiles. In other words, if 2 copies of Emerald have the same trendy phrase, they don't have the same Feebas tiles. The exception to this is if you mix records with someone, then you get their trendy phrase and their Feebas tiles. Feebas is also encounterable in Diamond, Pearl, and Platinum, and for some reason it's even harder to find here. Out of the 528 fishable tiles, Feebas will only appear on 4 of them. Furthermore, the tiles that contain Feebas change every single day, although you can, once again, get a friend's tiles for the day by mixing records. Evolving Feebas in Gens 3 and 4 is also a bit of a head-scratcher, as it requires you to raise Feebas's beauty stat up to 170, out of a maximum of 255. I think the only hint you get about this is that Milotic is Wallace's ace, and he goes on and on about beauty, but I don't know, I think this is still a little bit of a stretch. As for Munchlax, this one is at least dampened by the fact that you can just transfer or trade in a Snorlax and breed it to get Munchlax, but if you can't do that, I am so sorry. So Munchlax is a honey tree encounter. We're off to a great start because you have to wait 6 hours after putting honey on the tree for a wild Pokemon to even appear. But here's the real kicker, Munchlax only has a 1% encounter rate. Also, Munchlax only appears on 4 of the 21 honey trees throughout Sinnoh. Which 4? Well, you don't know. Unless you use an online calculator, you have to engage in trial and error. Trial and error that takes 6 hours per trial, and only has a 1% success rate on approximately 1/4 of the honey trees. Now, you can have honey on multiple trees at the same time, but I'm gonna be honest, that's still pretty bad. Thankfully, as time has gone on, Munchlax and Feebas have both become easier to obtain, and Feebas's evolution method got changed to be a trade evolution while holding a prism scale. Definitely a simpler method, but I think the old method of increasing beauty makes sense once you see that it evolves into Milotic. You look at it and go, oh, okay, now I see what they were going for with the evolution method. What were they going for with these two? Runerigus and Basculin have the most ridiculous evolution methods ever. Like, I'm genuinely asking, how were we supposed to figure this out without a guide or looking it up online? To evolve Galarian Yamask into Regigigas, it has to have taken 49 damage without fainting, and then you walk under this arch in the wild area. What? Now, to be fair, this likely isn't just some random nonsense. If you look at Bulbapedia's trivia section for Regigigas, there's a section talking about its evolution method potentially referencing Buddhist concepts and a particular style of tomb. Here's the thing though, how many people are not only familiar with the Buddhist concept of purgatory, dolmens and monoliths, and then will also think to put that together with Galarian Yamask and actually try this stuff out? Like, having neat secrets in video games are cool, don't get me wrong, but I'm not aware of any NPC that hints towards this, and these are some obscure concepts that are being referenced here. Furthermore, when you look at how other Pokemon evolve and you realize none of them require anything as specific as this, I'm just left scratching my head. Compare this to Milotic's old evolution method, where, sure, it's a process that you probably won't immediately think of doing if you don't know what to do to evolve Feebas. However, like I mentioned, it's not only somewhat hinted at by an NPC, but it's also something that makes sense after the fact, and that's because the concept of beauty is something that's simple to grasp. You talk to an 8-year-old about Buddhist purgatory, they're gonna have a few questions. As for Basculin, it evolves after white-striped Basculin, and only white-striped Basculin, takes 294 points of recoil damage. Bulbapedia's trivia section for Basculin talks about how the added ghost type, plus certain Pokedex entries, could be referring to how salmon usually die after spawning. Again, this evolution method requires you to know something that's not universal or near universal knowledge. How many people know how salmon die? Not only that, but then you have to think to try and apply that to Pokemon. In regards to the amount of recoil damage you need to take, Bulbapedia says that the number 294 could be a bit of wordplay involving an archaic Japanese word for hatred. I guess some of Basculin's Pokedex entries also talk about rage, so sure, why not at this point? But even legendary Pokemon can have cryptic encounter methods, with the first ones probably being the Regi trio in Ruby, Sapphire, and Emerald. Before you even think about finding them, first you have to open up their chambers. This requires taking a somewhat specific path on routes 132 through 134, and then using Dive a couple of times to find this cave. Once inside, if you look around and investigate things, you'll notice all of these patterns that the game is showing you. This is Braille. The game is trying to teach you Braille. No, I'm serious. This wall in the back of the cave has a message that's written out in Braille, and all of these other bits show you a couple of letters of the alphabet plus punctuation. Once you decipher what the message says and do what it tells you, another room opens, containing a bunch of lore and one more message in the back. This one is slightly different based on whether you're playing Ruby and Sapphire or Emerald. It tells you either first comes Relicanth, last comes Wailord, or first comes Wailord, last comes Relicanth. Once you look at the message with the correct Pokemon in the first and last slots of your party, the ground starts shaking and, well, it might not be immediately clear what this did, but 3 caverns opened up around the Hoenn region, each housing one of the 3 Regi Pokemon, Regirock, Regice, and Registeel. Each of those caverns look the exact same and have the same rock structures around them, so if you've done a bit of exploring, it's entirely possible you've already found these caverns in their sealed state. But what if you don't know where these Pokemon rest? Well, the only hint the game provides as to their locations is the fact that a Ruin Maniac resides in each of the routes where one of the Regis lie. 2 of the 3 get added to the match call in your Pokénav, although this requires you to have beaten the Ruin Maniacs before, so if you haven't, you don't get that hint. And then, once you find and enter their caverns, there's one more Braille puzzle for you to solve in each of the chambers. Only after you solve this final puzzle can you enter the room that houses one of the Regis and battle it. Finding the caverns with the Regis is definitely easier than figuring out the Braille puzzles, but this whole thing is honestly kind of neat. Maybe it's just nostalgia talking, since Ruby was my first Pokemon game, but between the lore of the Regis themselves, the ruined maniacs looking for these places and being so close yet so far, and everything that you have to do to encounter these guys, when you do it for the first time, there's a real sense of wonder, even if you had to use a guide for it like I did. Every other Pokemon game that features the Regis requires the player to solve some sort of puzzle before being able to battle them, but none are as involved and complicated as the ones in Ruby, Sapphire, and Emerald. Except for Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire, possibly. See, you can also get Regigigas in the remakes, and they couldn't just not give Regigigas a puzzle for the player to solve before encountering it, unfortunately. I don't like how they handled Regigigas in Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire. I think it's kind of lame and not very well thought out. Amongst the residents of Pacific Log, a little girl will tell you a story if you talk to her after catching Regirock, Regice, and Registeel. This story that she tells is a hint as to how to encounter Regigigas. Here's the problem though. She has 4 different stories, but you only ever get told one. The only way to get the other stories, and therefore the other hints, is to either restart the game or ask other people what they got. And here's the real kicker. In addition to having to do everything listed on screen, you also have to nickname your Regice, which isn't one of the hints given by the little girl. I believe nobody mentions this part in-game, so how are you supposed to figure this out without any help? Just dumb luck? Like, I don't necessarily hate the concept of needing to communicate with other players to gather the intel needed to solve a puzzle, but when the game doesn't give all of the intel, and the internet is so accessible that all of the answers are just going to be easily accessible anyway, this just doesn't feel as good as the original Regi trio. Even though their puzzles were still tricky enough to figure out that you're likely just going to look up the solution online, it's at least something that's solvable with just the game and no guide or internet or anything like that. There are more hard-to-find Pokemon that I could go over, but let's shift gears and talk about a couple more obscure and unexplained mechanics and NPCs. Pokemon FireRed and LeafGreen reward the player with certain things after they register a certain number of species as caught in their Pokédex. For example, you can get the Itemfinder on Route 11 after having 30 species of Pokemon caught. Use it, and if there's a hidden item on screen, it'll point you in the general vicinity of said item. Even if you're a few spaces away, you'll know an item's nearby. The twist you're all waiting for is that there are a total of 6 hidden items that act differently. 6 items that you can only get if you use the item finder on the exact spot the hidden item is located. Using the item finder nearby won't clue you in on its location. You just have to know where the hidden item is ahead of time, and then use the item finder. The most notable of these 6 items is probably leftovers. You can get 2 of them, actually, one underneath each of the Snorlax in the overworld. Not only is there zero mention or hint of how these 6 items work, but even the official guide for FireRed and LeafGreen makes no mention of these 6 items. Heck, it barely mentions hidden items in general. I skimmed through this guide and it's so garbage. I might make a quick video on it at some point. Finally, in Black 2 and White 2, the player can pick up this dropped item in Nimbasa City. This starts a side quest that I don't know what Game Freak was going for here. The dropped item belongs to Curtis if the protagonist is a girl, or Yancey if they're a boy. Regardless, Curtis/Yancey is too busy to get the dropped item back from the player. In order for you to be able to return the dropped item, you have to receive 10 calls from Curtis or Yancey. How do you receive calls from them? It's quite simple. You just have to step on specific tiles that have absolutely zero indication that something's going to happen there. To be fair, these tiles that you have to step on aren't in areas before Nimbasa City, so you're more likely to accidentally bump into them while playing through the game. Still, this isn't explained or really hinted at, so if you're trying to progress this side quest, you might not even realize what you have to do, never mind what tiles you have to step on. Some of these tiles are pretty easy to unintentionally step on. They're in the middle of a small pathway, for example. But others are definitely more random and out of the way. Thankfully, Cherubi has us covered. There are 15 cities or routes where Curtis or Yancey can call you, and Cherubi has screenshots of all the exact tiles we have to step on to receive the call. While there are 15 areas, we only need to be called 10 times, meaning we only need to go to 10 of these areas. This is good, since not only are some of these areas optional, Route 14 is not only optional, but the area you get a call at requires Waterfall to get to, but some of these screenshots show the wrong tile. Out of the 10 areas that I went to, Route 14 and Mistralton City had the wrong place shown. Mistralton City screenshot is a little too far north, you actually need to be down here, and Route 14 screenshot is on the wrong part of land at the top of the waterfall. You have to go to the right and stand here. After the 10th call, Curtis or Yancey will arrange a meetup in Nimbasa City to receive the dropped item from you. Once you do that, you might think this side quest is over, but no, it's just beginning. Curtis/Yancey would like you to call them now. The catch is, they're not always available. Remember those 15 areas that you had to visit 10 of before? Well now, the game randomly picks one of these areas as the one area you're able to call Curtis or Yancey from. Once you call them, the game randomly picks another area. Sometimes it can be the same area, but more often than not, you're going to have to fly to several different areas and check your cross-transceiver to see if you picked the right area. Again, zero indication this is what you have to do, or that this is how this works. At least you don't have to step on a specific tile to be able to call Curtis or Yancey this time. After having an additional 20 calls for a total of 30, you can start riding the Ferris wheel in Nimbasa City with Curtis or Yancey. After the ride, they'll offer to trade you one of 12 Pokemon, each at level 50, holding a particular held item and with their hidden ability, something that was harder to get at the time. A couple of the Pokemon you can get traded to you are Spiritomb and Snorlax, two Pokemon that aren't necessarily easy to get, which is pretty nice. Having said that, however, I do wish this was a little less cryptic to complete. Really, that's a sentiment that I find myself thinking about with a lot of these examples I've given. There's nothing wrong with having a rare Pokemon that requires a little bit of work to get, or some good items that aren't easily obtainable, or some neat wallpapers for your PC, or just rewards in general. These are nice things, good things, they should be here. But with the requirements to obtain this stuff being extremely tricky to figure out, sometimes not even in the game itself, I find myself feeling a bit disappointed at the end of the day. The line between making something too easy to figure out and leaving your players confused can be quite thin, which is why care is needed when developing things that are supposed to be secrets or puzzles or what have you. But these were just a few examples of hidden Pokemon content you need a guide for. I have more ideas in mind, but let me know what examples I didn't go over. Maybe we can make a volume 2 in the future. And with that, thank you so much for tuning in, everyone. I hope you enjoyed the video, maybe even learned something new, and a big thanks to Mithril Monarch, PK Smokey, Stodge, Sedzi, and Duna Nix, along with the rest of my patrons scrolling by, for going the extra mile and financially supporting the channel. See you next time, everyone.